There are so many graduate students that are doing amazing things and people in science that are doing amazing things with science, not only on their graduate work or their scientific work, but also their side hustles or what they like to, if they really get involved in science and they have a little bit of a knack or a skill to develop something, they can develop something. And today we're actually going to be talking to Paige Hole, who just finished her PhD in coastal eutrophication from UCLA in the US, but she's also known for a little page that she has on TikTok, and it's at 98,900 followers right now, and it continues to grow. There are some videos that she talks about different stories around like surfing waves and sort of the impacts of the Olympics on surfing waves. She also talks about the Resolute desk in the White House and how that has an oceanographic tie to it. She does these stories in just amazing ways, and I wanted to have her on the podcast so badly, and she actually reached out to be on the podcast, which I was so happy. So we have her on today. We're going to talk to Paige about science communication and about her PhD work and just science in general. So let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about speaking up for the ocean because we have Paige Hole, who's on the podcast today, talking about not only her PhD work that she did on coastal eutrophication and how she makes that really exciting to hear about, but also about her science TikTok. Her science communication TikTok efforts, which are absolutely amazing. If you want to go to her TikTok, it's at Lil Ocean Paige, Paige. You can check it out. You're not going to be alone in watching her videos, but she has this incredible knack to tell stories, and it's out of this world. I was a huge fan of her before she reached out to me to be able to be on this. She goes, "Hey, do you want me to come on the podcast? I can talk about this and this." And I was like, "Yes, absolutely, yes. I'm a huge fan of yours, so I'm really looking forward to it." It was an amazing podcast. We talked for over an hour about her PhD, about her science communication efforts, and it was absolutely riveting for me anyway, so I hope it is for you. She's super interesting individual. She tells stories on this podcast like she tells stories on TikTok, and it was an absolute pleasure to have her on. And a lot of the times, like when you hear people do a science communication effort or dedicate their time to doing science communication, you don't really hear about the nuts and bolts of how they put videos together or how they put a tweet together or how they put a strategy together. And, Paige goes in depth into that. And I think it's really interesting. On the other side of that, on the science side of it, where she actually does science, she talks a lot about, how she grew up wanting to do a PhD. It's ran in her family. I've never heard of that, but it ran in the family where multiple people in their family had PhDs. And so she always thought she was going to do a PhD. And then she got interested at the age of 4 or 5 in oceanography, which is insane if you think about it. And then now here she is just finishing a PhD in coastal eutrophication, oceanography, and just being super interested in that stuff that we don't really hear about all the time. Oceanography is not as common as we think. When we hear about someone studying the ocean, we automatically go to marine biology. She's like, no, oceanography is for me, and that's what I want to do. And she talks about her journey to there, how she chose the project that she did, and why it was so important, and then, of course, the science communication aspect. So there's so much to get out of this episode. You're probably going to want to listen to it more than once, and I don't blame you. But here's the interview with Dr. Paige Hole. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Paige, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about all things oceans and ocean storytelling?
Oh, I am so ready. I was born ready.
I feel that because I have to admit, I do a little research before I have people come on, and I did a lot of research on your TikTok page, and you probably tell the best stories that I ever, I'm a huge fan. So I'm very excited when you reached out, you're like, "Hey, Andrew, do you want me to come on your podcast? I can talk about my PhD. I can talk about story." I'm like, Absolutely. Like, this is awesome. And we found out we're both fans of each other. So
that
it's
was
going to be a lot of
perfect.
fun. Exactly.
It
So
was
there's going to be a lot of
meant to
conversation, but I want my audience to get to know you today and to get to know what you did for your PhD, how you got to the point where you're doing a PhD and what you want to do it on. And then even into the science communication and how you kind of fell into that and just realized you're like, hey, people like the way I tell stories. Okay, I like this. So we'll just see how that goes. But before we get into all that, Paige, why don't you just let people know who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, thank you for the kind intro, Andrew.
You bet.
So my name is Paige, and I am an oceanographer. I have a PhD in atmospheric and oceanic science, and I have more recently become known as Little Ocean Paige or PhD Paigey on TikTok, and I've had a relatively successful ocean TikTok for the last year or so, and I'm really just enjoying all the science communication and spreading the wonder that I've always had for the ocean, but now getting random strangers on the internet to learn along with me. It's been such a blast.
That's awesome because I am, as you know, I'm a huge proponent of getting people involved in the ocean. People who aren't like studying the ocean full time, or marine biologists or coastal scientists or oceanographers and conservationists who may not know much about the ocean and want it to be entertained at the same time as learning. And I think you do a perfect job in balancing those two. And it's not an easy thing to do. We definitely appreciate it. But what got you into the ocean in the first place? You say you've always had a curiosity. When do you remember that first time you were like, ooh, I like this place?
Yes. Well, how much time do we have?
We have lots of time.
No, so I was always one of those. I have a frankly annoying story, which is that I just knew from the jump. I was like 4 or 5 years old, and we had a VHS tape of Robert Ballard, Dr. Ballard, finding the battleship Titanic. Or no, the battleship Bismarck. This is the same scientist who found the Titanic originally.
Yes.
But this was a VHS tape about him finding the battleship Bismarck. And he, prolific oceanographer, he used all these different tools and now like very outdated technology to find the battleship. But I watched this VHS tape like until it couldn't play anymore. I was just so
Even at that age, like 4 and 5 years old.
age,
Wow.
I was sold. I was like, you can explore the ocean as a job? Like, that's a thing that you can do? I'm sold. And it helped that my grandmother lived in San Diego, and we would go down to visit her, and we'd spend our Saturdays just like at the beach, sand on every single part of my body, in the water. I was always like a water baby, and I just remember like wondering how the waves never stopped. Like
Right.
the waves keep coming, and every time I come here, there's waves, and like,
Yeah.
what is this place? So that like imagination was just like from the jump, and from there on out, it was like kind of a done deal. So yeah, from there it really progressed. It helped that I was good at math and science and physics
Just
and
about to ask that. Yeah.
chemistry. Yeah, I was always my family's like pretty scientific in background. I'm actually like one of a bajillion PhDs in my family.
Oh, okay.
Yes, which is an advantage in the sense that I was like, well, if my dad can get one, if my grandpa
Mm,
can get one, if my great grandmother had one, like why not me? It seemed like a very like not like it was an expectation, but almost in a sense it seemed very accessible because I was like, well,
that's
they all did
interesting.
it, so
Yeah.
why not me?
Yeah.
But yeah, I knew I was interested in oceanography, not marine biology. I find marine biology fascinating, but I
Yep.
like can't see blood, so the thought of cutting any animal open was like a no-go for me.
That makes sense.
Um, but yeah, I understood that like, oh, it's understanding the physics of the ocean,
Hmm. Hmm.
understanding the chemistry of the water. And yeah, it was just like, okay, that's what I got to do. I got to be good at math. I got to be good at chemistry. I got to be good at physics. And then it also helped too that my dad makes software for a mapping company. And so
Oh,
maps were very prolific in our household.
yes.
And I
Yes.
loved maps of the ocean floor, maps of countries and interesting
Even like the
topographic
older
maps.
maps, right? Where the
Oh,
geography changes and the sort of the morphology
I
changes as you go through
love
it. Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So it was pretty, yeah, it was kind of straightforward for me from the jump. I was like, okay, I love the ocean. I'm good at school. I'm just gonna keep riding this until the wheels fall
Yeah.
off.
I love it. Now, were you one of those students, say in high school, like, it's a math intensive subject matter. Even just to
Hmm.
get into science, to get into university, right? You got to take your physics,
Hmm.
you got to take your chemistry, you got to take your calculus and functions and whatever that might be. Were you a student that naturally, like, you were able to learn it pretty quickly, or did you have to like work your butt off to get that, to understand it?
Yeah, I think so.
There's no wrong answer,
Yes,
by the way, on this.
yeah,
There's no
yes
wrong
and no.
answer.
I'd be lying if I say I wasn't just good at math. I've always been good at math. Um, but I think when I got into high school and then college, university really was a kick in the butt my first year because in high school, I knew the exact amount of time I could put in and I would get a result and it would work. And then I just assumed that would transfer to a
Hmm.
university. And I did my undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara, and which is like a pretty rigorous school.
Yeah.
And going through that, it was like Calc 2, my first quarter, I failed. I got a D. I'd
Oh,
never
wow.
gotten anything lower than a
Yeah.
B in my entire life. I was like,
Right.
oh my gosh. And I was so upset. I think I got a C in chemistry, and I was like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
such a good student. Like,
First
and
year
I
college will
remember,
kick your butt. It kicks
oh my
everybody's butt,
gosh.
right?
Oh my gosh. But I remember being so upset. And
Yeah.
my mom came into my room and was like, so you just think because you worked hard, you're entitled to an A. Is that what you think? Like, welcome to
Well,
the
tough
real world,
love.
Paige. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa. But I mean, she was right. She was
Hmm.
right. And she's like,
Hmm.
it's not about you failing this class. It's like, what are you going to do now? You
Hmm.
got to pick yourself up, like brush your knees
Hmm.
off, like like deal with your bruised ego later. What are you going to do now? And I think normalizing like failing. So many people fail so many times before
Yep.
they get it right. I think
Yep.
the like perception that you need to be perfect at everything will cripple you. You won't
Yes.
achieve anything because you'll just be scared. But yeah, I mean, I failed two math classes in college as an undergrad. And I retook them and I got A's the second time.
Yeah.
I did okay in physics. I got through it. I took like the engineering level of physics.
So, like,
Um,
hella hard.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But also too, I've always known that I had a good storytelling ability, and I've always known that what I lack, like even if I'm not an A plus student, my enthusiasm
Yes.
counteracts that, and we can't all be the same. Like, there can be someone that's better than me at research but can't tell the story. So how valuable is the research that they did,
Yeah.
if no one's going to know about it?
Yeah.
So
Or
I always kind of
that
lean
even
back on
tracks
that.
with when you go for a grant. It's a storytelling exercise, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you apply for a grant. So you may be able to do the research and kick butt in the research, but if you can't get
Mm-hmm.
the grant to pay for the research, you're not going to be able
Yeah.
to do the research in the first place, right? So it is
Yeah.
that comes into play. That personalization
Absolutely.
comes into play, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what did during that part, like, that's a tough time, and a lot of students go through that. That's just not you. I went through that. A lot of people, we get humbled in university. What That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter the year. There's always one course or two courses that really humble. For me, it was invertebrate zoology 1 and 2. That our lab test or lab exam was like, you had to identify the animal in a microscope, and then you answered a question on it. If you got the animal wrong, you were marked like 6 out of 10, if to
Oh,
get perfect, right? So,
yeah.
and it was never an animal that you've seen before. It was always an animal that you hadn't seen before, but you had to go through the process and identify the kingdom and the phylum and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Super, super
Yeah.
difficult. But like, for me, I learned like to be resilient. Like, how did that
Mm-hmm.
teach you to sort of like, because like look, doing a PhD is harder than undergrad,
Oh,
right? So how did that teach you to like fight back and just be like, no, I'm going to scrape and crawl and do what I can to take everything that I know and to believe in myself to be able to do that kind of work?
Yeah, that's the keyword there is belief. It's such a fake it till you make it type of deal because you realize like that you realize when you're in university that, it goes two ways. Sometimes it's like everyone's smarter than me, everyone has all this knowledge. But then you also do realize, well, everyone had to learn it once. Everyone was a beginner at some point. And when you get to a certain level of academics, a lot of it I do think is grit. Like, obviously, you need a certain amount of, like, ability to retain knowledge. But at a certain point, I definitely realized as an undergrad, I was like, I think this is just about just pushing onwards, and also to like asking for help, asking and putting yourself in the situations that you didn't think you deserved. Why not try?
Yep.
Like as an undergrad, I took graduate level classes the last year because I was like, you know what? Why not? Like,
Yeah.
let me just ask these professors and see if I have the chops to get through a couple graduate level classes. And if I can do that, then why can't this? Like, why can't this? But I started, and part of it, yeah, is you got to be a little bit cocky to be like,
Yeah.
why not me?
I got this.
Why not? Yeah, I got this. Whatever. And what's the worst that's going to happen, right?
Right.
Like, my worst case scenario is really not that bad in the grand scheme of things. So I might as well shoot my shot.
Yeah.
But I feel like once I realized I just needed to ask and put myself out there and like continue to like bite off seemingly more than I could chew, I was rewarded. It was like, oh, you want to do an undergraduate thesis with some esteemed professor? Great. He's excited to work with an undergrad. Or like you want to intern for this company in Denmark? Cool. They're actually interested in you because you asked. Like so much of opportunities, like in this podcast, like you just got to ask.
It's
You
true.
gotta you don't wait for life to happen to you. You got to like go after it. And so in terms of a PhD as well, where that is a 5-year exercise in getting kicked in the teeth. Like it is so humbling, but at the same time, like you just got to ask. You just got to keep like you're there. You found your way there.
Yeah.
That's not for nothing. Like keep trying, keep asking. And a lot of a PhD too, which I didn't realize until maybe halfway through, is it's proving that you're a scientist. It's like making yourself into a scientist and proving you're a scientist. It's not about being right. Because so much of science is getting things wrong. And if you're so afraid to get things wrong that you don't do anything a little bit risky or do any interesting research or come up with any interesting ideas, then you're kind of failing your PhD because you're not there to get it right. It's not a class where there's A, B, C, D. It's an exercise in making yourself into a scientist. And so that is a totally different experience, but it gets back to like the grit. Like just ask, just push. Even if you don't think you deserve to be there, like just keep going.
Well, here's case in point. When you reached out to ask to be on the podcast, you were on my mind to ask to be on the, like I was going to ask you to be on. I just never did. I'll be like, she's at 98,000 followers on TikTok. Like, there's no way she's going to, like, she must get messages upon messages upon messages. So if I DM her, is she going to even see the message? Right. And like, then we find out we're fans of each other and you're just like, oh my God, like, we're just people. And yes, of course I want you on the podcast. And, and it's just a matter of asking and putting yourself out there to just be like, yeah, might as well,
Might as well.
Yeah. But that's such a hard thing to get over, I think, especially as a young undergrad student. I think it's one of those things where even in the science, like we all have friends we've probably roomed with or been in a house with during the undergrad where they're in business and they don't start class until 1:00 in the afternoon. And meanwhile, like I started when I was at 8:30 every semester of my undergrad career. And I went because there's labs that happen in the afternoon that are all afternoon. And as much fun as they are, it's a hard day. It's a hard day's work, and it's a hard program to get through. No matter what you're going through, science related, it's a hard program to get through. And so like during that time, you still have, the want to do, oceanography and all that type of work. What was going through your mind during your undergrad? Like, how did your mind change, or did your mind change in terms of what you wanted to do afterwards, whether it be work or even PhD, or what you wanted to what avenue and what field you wanted to go down?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I was so gung-ho oceanography that I thought I think this was my freshman or sophomore year. I was like, you know what? If I want to do oceanography, I should talk to grad students who are doing it right now and see, A, what they have to tell me, B, if it seems like they're having a good time. Yeah. So I reached out, I sent Lord knows how many emails, probably like 30 or 40 emails. So I went on to, and UC Santa Barbara is like a mecca for oceanography. So
right, yeah.
I looked on all of the different departments' websites, like the geography department, the earth science department, and I was majoring in earth science and geography, so I already knew some of those grad students. They had a special ocean science graduate school. I found everyone who was doing research that I was remotely interested in, and I sent them an email. I was like, hey, I'm an undergrad. Your research sounds cool. Can we sit down for coffee? Can I come by your office? And eventually what that ended up with was I got opportunity to do research with one graduate student who is towards the marine biology and like fishery side. Yeah. And I helped him out with his research for like almost a full year. And that was cool because I got to see, he was in year 2, 3 of his PhD, and I got to see what that kind of phase was like. And then I got another grad student responded to me, Alexa, who like kind of remained my mentor to this day. And she was an absolute dynamo. I couldn't believe she was even talking to me. Right. But she was like, your email was endearing and I wanted to help you out. Yeah. She's like, yeah, you seemed really enthusiastic. And so through those relationships and just staying really in tune with the faculty, I we had some great professors, and I just went to office hours every single opportunity I could. Even if I didn't have questions, I just wanted to talk to them and be like, how'd you get into oceanography? How this? And actually I think this was my junior year, Bob Ballard came to talk to the earth science faculty at UCSB. He's actually a UCSB alum. Okay. And I got an email about it. This was supposed to be a faculty meeting. I don't know how I got the email, but I was like, oh my gosh, drop everything. I went home to go get one of his books, Eternal Darkness, which is about, and I brought it, and it's a faculty meeting. We're around a round table. But thankfully I knew the professors. They're like, Paige, what are you doing here? And I was like, I just want to listen. And after the meeting, I went up to Dr. Ballard. I was like, I'm being cool right now, but I'm such a huge fan, and this is a life-changing moment, and can you sign my book, and can we take a picture? So through my undergrad, I was really emboldened. I was like, I can do this. Yeah. I can, it is worth my time. And it helped that I had friends obviously outside, and UC Santa Barbara is known to be a party school. So, you get a little bit of everything. There's great academics, but it's also sunny and 70 every single day, and you're on the beach. So, at times it was oh man, I wish I didn't have 2 tough majors to do. But at the same time, it was just so cool, and the instructors were good, and I could see I was making progress towards my goal. Like I
Right.
could see, okay, like people are talking to me. I was like presented at a conference, like all those little things that made me affirm to me that all of my efforts were not for nothing. It would
Did it
be
also
different, I think, if I was just taking classes and I was like, what am I doing all this work for? Like, but I respond well to um, external affirmation. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, but did you think
Some of the
also
things.
too, like there's the affirmation part, but it's almost that motivation when you start to volunteer with somebody to do their help them do their
Mm-hmm.
graduate work. It's like, oh, this is really cool stuff. Like this
Yes,
is amazing
yes.
stuff. Like even the student you said it was a bit more marine biology, it probably confirmed you're like, yeah, I'm probably not into the whole marine biology thing, but there's all
Hmm.
this other stuff. Did you get to do some field work with this graduate student?
Yes, yeah.
So
We
there you
were.
get to do the field work. That's
Mm-hmm,
cool. Like
mm-hmm.
it just
So
motivates
cool.
you to want to do it that much more, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We were collecting crabs. We like went into the field. We went on like boats to go get crabs. I was like, this is so cool. And then we had crab tanks, and
Yeah.
then we would dissect the crabs, which was so disgusting. But still, I was like, whoa, this is
Yeah. At
so
least there's no
neat.
blood. At least there's no
Yeah,
blood.
true, 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 true. I saw more crab carapaces than I would like to have, but still, it was like I like this whole process. I think
Yeah.
this is interesting. I could see
Yeah.
myself doing this,
Yeah.
and yeah, like no, I felt like no time was wasted. So I'm thankful I went through all of it, but it's not for the faint of heart. It is like very time
It's
consuming if you really pursue it.
well, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize when they go into undergraduate and even graduate work is it's supposed to take up a lot of time. Like not
Yeah.
just do it. You're not just there to go through the motions, get the marks, get the classes, and then graduate. University can offer so much more. Like college can offer so
Yes.
much more, and it's up
Yes.
to you to take advantage of that. I
Hmm.
find, in my experience anyway, and this is not everybody's experience, but it sounds like it's quite like your experience, where professors are very open to conversation. If you show passion, you show you want to help out or you want to do something, you want to volunteer, they will have you in their labs if they have room. You know,
Hmm.
if there are
Hmm.
people who want to go out in the field, they're always looking for undergraduate students to help graduate students. And
Hmm.
I think that really helps. And I find like with my experience, the professor had like a little community in their lab, and it was like
Yep.
you felt part of that. That almost became
Hmm.
your a bit of your friend group, like your professional friend group. And I still have
Hmm.
those friendships to this day.
So cool.
And now we're like sometimes we're colleagues when we work and stuff. And so that it's a kind of a cool experience, but you have to kind of get out of the it's true. You gotta get out of the party and social side all the time to
Hmm.
really immerse yourself into the university atmosphere and the
Yeah.
ability to do research or field work or extra skill sets or whatever that might be
Yep.
to be able to do that. I think that's really cool. But
And
at
it's
what
hard
point?
to have that perspective at that age too, to know the
Yeah.
opportunity that you have.
Oh, for sure.
When you're
For
18 years
sure.
old, you're just like, this is the next thing to do. It's hard to
Yeah.
know that like this is your opportunity that you'll never have again. Hard to
Yeah.
know.
Well, there are a lot of distractions at university. There's a lot to do.
Hmm.
Like you can get
Hmm.
involved in clubs, you can get a job and like at a bar and that becomes your life. And like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard. Like there's a lot to I mean, especially in the US when like
Oh
like
yeah.
university sports are such a big thing. You get the
Uh-huh.
whole fraternity aspect is a big
Hmm.
thing and
Hmm.
there's like the
I was in
independent
a
aspect is a
sorority. I
big
rode my freshman year.
there you go. Yeah, right. And
Yes,
sometimes
yes,
that could be opportunities for you, right? Like that could lead to
absolutely.
other opportunities, but at other times it could be a distraction to what you want to do
Yeah,
if your group is not necessarily focused on the same thing. And
yeah,
so you
totally.
really have to work a little extra to get to that, which you did, which is awesome. But at what point where
Hmm.
you're like, I'm going to do a PhD? Like you had your family who were probably like, yeah, you could do it. Like you're on track to do that. But
Yeah,
at what point
yeah.
did you be like, were you like, I want to do a PhD, but not only doing a PhD, but I want to do it in like coastal eutrophication? Because that's very specific.
Yes. So yeah, the PhD thing was always kind of set for me because it was really in high school when I thought about, okay, I'm interested in the ocean. What specific jobs could I get?
Mm,
And I looked into actually being an oceanographer. What does that entail? There are very few oceanographer jobs where you don't have a PhD
mm-hmm,
because you're
mm-hmm.
doing research.
Yep.
Oceanography is not cheap.
Mm-hmm.
They need very
That's
well
true.
educated people to do it. Um, so I knew from the jump, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to get a PhD. Um, but coastal eutrophication came to me kind of my sophomore, junior year of college. I was taking a biogeochemistry class, biology, geology, and
Love
chemistry
it.
all put together. And it was a marine biogeochemistry class. It's taught by David Valentine at
Oh,
UCSB. Shout out. He's an incredible
yeah.
biogeochemist.
Yes, he is.
Um, and uh, yeah, I just remember like the nutrient cycles were so fascinating to me, and how nutrients interact so tightly with primary productivity and the
Mm-hmm.
biological pump. And then it was like, oh my gosh, we are really altering the nutrient cycle of the ocean in a way that we never have before.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Never. Like, because if you even think about, the Earth has been around for billions of years. There have been times where the ocean has been incredibly warm and the physics has changed and the weather is different. But the eutrophication, the influx of human nutrients is unprecedented. We've never seen
Right.
anything like this. Um, and once I realized how interconnected it all was and how you could be a coastal you could be a coastal ocean biogeochemist and focus specifically on oxygen or focus specifically on nitrogen, or there's like a million different
Yeah.
angles. And I also think too, um, I love research for the sake of research, but to be frank, I want to do something that's like directly in touch with humanity and how we interact with the ocean. Because the ocean is a resource for us. It's also like maintaining our planet, and I find the interchange really interesting. Like, okay, if we do need to dispose of wastewater and we don't live in a perfect world where there's no wastewater, what's the safest way in which we can dispose of it in the ocean? Because we're not in a perfect world. And so
Mm-hmm.
all of those kind of questions really fascinated me. So that was about my junior year of college. And then my senior year, I did kind of a eutrophication style um, thesis. And I was totally enthralled. I was
That
also
was it.
enthralled with harmful algal blooms
Right.
that had, and actually I was exposed to those when I was doing research with the graduate student who was taking crabs, because some of the crabs had domoic acid, which is prevalent
Right.
on the west coast of the United States from harmful algal blooms. And I was like, what? Like, this crab is poisoned? And he's like, yep, you wouldn't eat this crab. And that also to me is just like, wow, like it's all so interconnected. And so it
Yeah.
was around then that I was like, all right, it's coastal eutrophication done.
That's awesome. And so,
Yeah.
like, for your PhD, did you do it at UCLA? Is that where you did your
Yes.
PhD? Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
you moved down the coastline a little bit to
Yeah.
UCLA. Who was your supervisor, and like why did you pick that supervisor?
Yeah. So my advisor was Daniele Bianchi. And, when I was looking at graduate schools, I like looked at all the major oceanographic schools, and I was looking, okay, who's doing coastal eutrophication? It wasn't until kind of at the end of my search that I was talking to a scientist at Scripps, Clarissa Anderson, and she was really involved in harmful algal bloom research. And I was like, I think I'm interested in how human nutrients affect harmful algal blooms. And she was like, I don't have any money, but I have a colleague who's really smart who just got a grant. You should go talk to him. And so, yeah, it was crazy too because I worked so hard on my applications for like 5 other schools. But at the last minute, he was like, "Yeah, I applied to UCLA," and I was like, "Okay,
Okay,
cool."
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so I ended up there, and it was a great fit. I liked that his work was modeling based, so
mm,
using a big coupled physical biogeochemical model to make estimates instead of in situ sampling, which
yeah,
has so many merits, but that is really expensive, really
yep,
time consuming. You're
yep.
at the whim of the ocean too. It's an unforgiving environment.
Especially the
Um,
Pacific. Yeah,
yes, it's like Southern California,
yeah,
you would be shocked. So I was And I love the, like, and this really gets into like my geography background, but I love that the spatial resolution of a model is everything. A
Yes.
model is inherently false because it is a model, but when you're dealing with ocean observations, you are at the whim of where can you take your ship, where is a pier, where
Yeah.
is a buoy, and you
Yep.
have to guess for everything else. Whereas like the model really appealed to me. So yeah, once I was in, I was so happy to be there. Actually ended up that another student he had coming in was like a better fit for the harmful algal bloom research.
Okay.
And so I just moved into general eutrophication in the coastal Southern California bight,
Okay.
that region of the ocean around Southern California. And I focused, at the beginning of my PhD, I specifically focused on wastewater treatment policies.
Oh,
So
interesting.
in Southern California, about 1 billion gallons of wastewater are pumped back out into the ocean every single day. It's a lot
It's
of
a
wastewater.
lot of waste. That
Yes.
affects things. That affects
Yes,
things.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's all treated wastewater, so it's treated to a secondary degree, meaning that all the organics, all of like the poop and urine and all the nasty stuff, it's turned back into inorganic nitrate
Right.
and ammonium. But still, when you pump that much nitrate and ammonium into the ocean, it's going to have major impacts on phytoplankton and primary production. And so my research focused on some hypothetical scenarios of different water treatment.
Yep.
And, as we start to recycle more wastewater, how is that going to change where things are growing in Southern California? Um, and,
Especially as the
and
population increases too. And
yes,
right. That's a huge
yes,
factor as well. Yeah.
23 million people and counting. So
Man.
very reliant, and the beaches of Southern California are visited more than the beaches of the entire rest of the United States combined,
I believe that.
which is
I believe that. It's
crazy.
insane to think
So it's
about.
like, how do we keep these beaches
Yeah.
healthy, but also we do really rely on, like, where else are we going to dispose of this wastewater? So I love that, like, human ocean, those questions I love. And now, especially with like offshore wind energy becoming very prevalent all over, I love the spatial question of like, where could you do this? Where would this be smartest? Where is safe for marine species? These questions I
Yeah.
love to think about all the different angles.
Well,
So it was an easy decision.
especially as the complexity increases, like the ocean users increase, like you mentioned, bringing in,
Yes.
offshore wind power, but you also have, fishers, you also have,
Mm-hmm.
beach goers, you also have cruise ships and shipping in general, like just
Mm-hmm.
transshipping in general. Then you have like rivers. I think is it the Tijuana River that empties out into
Yes,
California,
out right
like Southern
next to
California?
San Diego. Yes.
Yeah, right. And that's a river to like that has a lot of stuff in it. Let's just say
Yes. Yes.
to
Yes.
come
Yes.
out,
Yes.
right? And
The
so like
big unknown.
yeah, and it's a lot. It's a big water area, but there's a lot of people on the coast, and that has to be accounted for, and so that's a really interesting thing. But not a lot of people think about it. So like when you talk to about your PhD to even your family who are full of PhDs, right? Like when you talk
Yeah.
about that, do they relate to eutrophication? Even friends and stuff like that, do they relate to that? Because like when you see people studying oceanography, some of it's like a lot of oceanographers, deep sea biology these days, and with
Yeah.
the whole deep sea mining and stuff that becomes popular. Eutrophication always seems like water quality always seems, even though it's super important, it's always at the lower end of the
Yes.
scale when it comes
Yes.
to interest until like a massive algal bloom comes out, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Exactly. Exactly. And I think with like having grown up, so I grew up about an hour and a half inland from LA, like closer towards Palm Springs. So even if, you don't go to the beach all the time, people know when it's like, oh, I heard there was a red tide. Like, oh, I
yeah,
heard there was,
like
and I
E.
do
coli
think,
or something. Yeah.
yes, people are very interested. I think it is, and, with my research, I moved on to understanding how eutrophication impacts kelp. And
Mm,
people have so many questions. They're like,
yeah.
I saw a bunch of kelp here, and why isn't kelp growing here anymore? And um, so I will say, and especially in the sense that water treatment contributes so much nutrients to the ocean, and it's so important for California. We're in Southern California is like in a drought half the time.
Yeah.
So it is really important to like have these conversations about what are we doing with our water?
Yeah.
Where is it going? People want to know about desalination.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say I'm grateful that my research is usually really well received to the point where at my graduation party, I had to, I was like, I gave a presentation on my research to all my friends and family. And then I said, please, can we talk about anything else the rest of the night? Because I love the questions, but I have gotten so many the last like
Yeah.
5 years. Um, but yeah, I will say it's well received, especially to as in Southern California is very progressive with their water treatment standards. They've
Okay.
definitely raised the bar. The Ocean Protection Council (OPC)
Mm-hmm.
is part of California State Water Board. They're very aggressive
Yeah.
in treating their water, and it has paid off.
Yeah.
So all very interesting, and again, it's just like it all relates because uh, people care. If they don't care about wastewater, they care about fish,
Yeah.
and the quality of the water impacts where the fish are.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone wants to know why there is stinky kelp on their beach or why there isn't kelp where it used to be. It's like
Yeah.
all of these questions. And with sharks in Southern California, they're like, what's the deal with the sharks? And that I know less about, but I do know about the fish. And I know the
Yeah.
fish are related to the primary production, which is related to the
Absolutely.
wastewater. So it all kind of comes back together. So usually people are like, what? Like, tell me more. What does this mean? I'm like, okay, I wish I could have.
Well, and that takes me to your communication, like a side hustle or
Mm,
whatever it might
mhm,
be. People
mhm,
asking you questions and your ability to answer them in a way that's interesting for people. How
mhm.
was that? Like, how did you develop that skill set? Is that just sort of one of those things you're like, I just enjoy telling stories and this is just the way it comes out as I do it?
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall. Looking back, like for example, I had science projects in elementary and middle school, and I would pretend to be like an oceanographer on TV, or I would be a TV meteorologist. Yeah, I always
Love it.
loved to communicate science. I found it so interesting, and I
Mm-hmm.
always did kind of have a knack for it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until it was around COVID, right when COVID was happening, I just started my PhD, and I was going to teach a class, a general education class at UCLA on climate change. And this was like a big class, like 400 students, and most of them non-majors. So most of them like comm majors, psych majors, and frankly, most of them go into, and I don't know if you have any experience teaching a GE, but most students go into an oceanography class or a climate change class not knowing that it's going to be a lot of math and physics.
Right.
They're like,
Right.
I'm going to learn about polar bears and whales. And it's
Yeah.
like,
Nope.
let's talk about radiation on Earth. How much do you know about ultraviolet radiation? And so I wanted to do a really good job teaching,
Yeah.
and so I started a lecture series for my friends. And this was the beginning of COVID, where everyone was like doing virtual happy hours
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff. And so I was like, hey, friends, like, I'm going to teach you about climate change. I'm going to have one lecture a week. It's going to be 30 or 45 minutes. It's going to be informal. And
That is
I'm going to,
so smart. That is
yeah,
so smart.
so I practiced teaching first to a general audience because I knew it's so hard when you are deep in the science to remember that most people are not.
Yes.
Like, it is the bane of my existence trying to get other scientists and faculty, remember that, try and remember a time where you didn't know anything about this and now
Mm-hmm.
explain it.
Yeah.
Now explain it from square one. And so with all of my friends from like every different, walk of life, I would give these lectures, and that was super enjoyable. So that then morphed into that actually was really fun. And then after I was done with my lectures, all of my friends each gave a lecture on something from their industry, which was really cool. But from that lecture series, I made a newsletter. And so I would do a newsletter every like month or so related to climate change, oceanographic stuff. I went on 2 oceanographic cruises, one with the Ghost Ship program, which does repeat cruises doing carbon measurements. So they go on a couple different routes all around the world, and every like 10 years, they measure all the carbonate chemistry and see how carbon is changing in the ocean because it's sequestering carbon dioxide. So I did that, and I did a lot of newsletters when I was on that cruise because people had so many questions. I was like, great, let me just do a bunch of newsletters while I'm at sea. And then I did the same thing. I had another cruise with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That one was more mapping focused. Again, I did a bunch of newsletters while I was doing that. But all the while, I was still teaching that climate change class at UCLA, and now in person. But still, I had so many students tell me, like, Paige, you should start a TikTok. And I was like, I wasn't even on TikTok.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know. I think I'm too old. You know, I was like, I didn't even know who was on TikTok. I figured it was like all dancing. And I was like, I don't think so. I have a girlfriend who I love so dearly. She makes running content. She was a collegiate runner, and we became best friends. And I told her, I was like, well, actually, I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel. And she was like, do not do that. She's like, I'm on YouTube and I'm on TikTok, and let me tell you, no one's going to see your stuff on YouTube for years.
Right.
Like, you should make a TikTok.
It's a long game, long-term game. Yeah.
Yeah. She's like, if you want people to pay attention right now, you should make a TikTok. And I was like, okay. So it was born from there. It was because she did it. And then I still couldn't believe that I figured oceanography was oversaturated on TikTok. I was like, there's got to be great ocean people out there. I wasn't on it, so I didn't know who was doing, but I figured. I was like, so I started the channel actually making some like undergrad college tips and like PhD tips in terms of like, how do you apply to a PhD program? How do you find a good advisor? What kind of workload can you expect? So I was doing that for about, I don't know, half a year to a year. And I had like a modest following, I think at like 20,000, 10,000 followers or something.
Which is still huge. Like I know we talk about TikTok being like huge in terms of followers, but that's still a lot. 20,000.
Yeah.
That's still a lot.
It was like cool that a lot of people felt like they really trusted me. I think the blonde Bob is very endearing. And I think people inherently are like, she's not a threat.
She's not.
I honestly believe that. I've had this haircut my whole life. I'm like, I think this has some power. But yeah, and then I was still doing, but I was doing the separate newsletters about oceanography stuff. And then it was one of my dad's like old frat buddies who I all consider to be uncles. He sent me an email and he was like, what is the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation and what is going on? And I did a whole newsletter on it, and I was like, let me just do, the newsletters are super informal, and so I was like, let me also just film a TikTok, and that TikTok like blew up. I got like a couple million views, and I was like, oh, okay.
So people do want to hear about it. Yeah.
People do want to hear, and I guess I have the right expertise, and from there it was so fun to put the videos together, and it just blew my mind every time that I was like, how are hundreds of thousands or millions of people watching this? I'm so glad they are. But yeah, it was just like, it just fit very well. And again, a lot of it I think goes back to that teaching experience that I had at the university level, where it's like, how do I get these college freshmen that are looking at me like they want to die when I just told them how much physics they need to learn, like these intense equations to understand the Earth, and I'm like, no, stay with me. Like, this is actually really cool. I promise we can get through this. let me make an analogy.
Yeah.
And from there on out, it was like, yeah, it was a good fit. And honestly, it really blew up the last year of my PhD, my
Mm-hmm.
final year, and it provided such a nice reprieve at times
Because you're
because
focused on writing at that point. Like it's not as much
writing
analytics, it's
and it's
writing.
just stressful and
Yeah.
you know it's going to get done, but you don't feel like you can do it. And, every once in a while I'd be like, what if I make a TikTok about thermal expansion of water? Okay, let me do that. And I'd like take that, take an hour to like dally a little bit, but it ended up being like very motivating and fun for me to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of clicked from there.
I love it. Now, where did you with TikTok, it's almost like a style that people have, right? Like some people will
Mm-hmm.
have like dancing videos. That's probably
Mm-hmm.
when first people think about TikTok, they think of dancing videos, and
Mm-hmm.
and then, but there's others who there's like political TikTok, there's science TikTok, there's book talk, I think they call it, like TikTok.
Yeah.
There's all these different categories, and everybody has within each category they have their own style.
Yep.
And lately, like if I go back to your last probably like 30 videos, it's very
Mm-hmm.
much like you need to learn about this. Like you need to know, like,
Yeah.
have you heard of this? And it's like that nice hook where you're just like, oh no, I haven't heard of this. I need to
Yeah.
know about this. And
Yeah.
then you go into a lot of detail in your
Uh-huh.
stories. Like
Mm-hmm.
useful information that
Mm-hmm.
really makes the story interesting. How long did it take for you to realize like this is like a fun formula for you to like use, but also a winning formula to in terms of like getting people to view and watch and enjoy your content?
Yeah. It really hit from the first, like from I made a TikTok about, so there was research released on the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, and that's the the flow of warm water from the Gulf Stream up to kind of the Arctic region and how it subducts underneath um, the like North Atlantic. And a report came out about how it's like potentially shutting down and how it's
Mm-hmm.
very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, let me make a TikTok on this. But if I say Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, swipe immediately. I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
no. So I forget but I took a screenshot of the headline that I had
Yeah.
seen that it was on like CNN or something. It was like a very
Right.
dramatic headline. It was like ocean circulation may shut down and da 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 da. And I started a TikTok like it's a green screen and my face was on it, and which is like the way it started. It was a lot of people's initial reaction, which would be just like, oh no, like so I waited a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I waited a second for people to be able to read the headline,
Yeah.
which is crazy. And
Right.
like, you know what, if it worked for the article,
Yeah.
it'll work for my TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Like people will be invested. So I read that, I was like, oh no. And then I was like, here's what this means. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's break down why this is an alarming thing.
Yeah.
So that format worked great. And my whole style is like talk a little bit, green screen, point to figure, talk,
Yeah.
point, show. I've always been a very visual learner, but also
Mm-hmm.
too again, with teaching, I find that like as little text as
Mm-hmm.
possible,
Mm-hmm.
pictures,
Yep.
like tell a visual story. TikTok is a visual app. So I knew that obviously what I said had to be engaging, but also I wanted to be able to be like, look at me, now look at this, now look at me. And I didn't know at the time it was a winning formula, but after like I've grown in popularity, people are like, "Oh, did you know? Yeah, it's so smart of you to show your face because people like to see your face online because it makes them feel like they know you better."
Yes.
And it's like all these things that I was just doing, just, giving these like sentence, like
Yep.
changing the pictures. I didn't realize what I was doing was a winning thing to do until I'd made like a couple good videos, which I enjoyed. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this seems to be working. But I will say, yeah, the hardest part of my videos is the hook. Is like,
Yeah.
where do I begin?
Yes.
Because I find everything interesting, but there's so many crazy, fascinating stories about the ocean and the atmosphere and our climate that I could tell. But the hook on TikTok, it's like you lose people in the first
Well, people are just
three
scrolling with their
seconds.
thumb, right? Like
Yeah,
if that, it's almost
yeah,
like half a second. If they don't like what they
yeah,
see, if something on the page doesn't capture them,
yeah.
like I've watched videos on just even YouTube shorts where people are like, if you zoom in right away, then people start to, that catches the eye. If you
Mm-hmm.
walk into the scene, that catches the eye, or something pops
Mm,
up that catches the eye. Like something really has to catch, because if not, they're just, I'm off to the next video without even
yeah,
thinking of the rest.
yeah. So that's the art because once I start talking, I can tell a lot of stories, but what makes the my most successful videos the most successful is that I figured out the hook. I like knew the way in and it played my cards right, but it's not easy to do.
No, not easy to do at all. Um,
Mm-mm.
like, and when you start to look at some of your videos, like you start to look and you're like, I've got some good views on here. Like your
Yeah.
average, I'm looking at them now, and you're like averaging at least, in the thousands, sometimes
Uh-huh.
multiple thousands. Like I'm looking at
Mhm.
45, 16, 70. And every once in a
Mhm.
while you just start 2.5 million.
Yeah.
You have one that's 7.2 million.
That's
You know,
crazy.
it's insane to think about how many people are watching these videos, right? Like,
I can't even believe. And the funny thing is, and I tell this to my friends all the time, I'm now like whatever, a published author. I have like a couple first author papers for my PhD. No one is going to read my dissertation cover to cover other than me. But millions of people will watch my TikTok. Like, and for all the academics that are hesitant with science communication, it's like, okay, I understand it's hard teaching old dog new tricks, but like I'm gonna get maybe 1,000 eyes on my best paper at the end of the year, maybe if it blows up.
mhm.
But I just like talked to 4 million people about Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which like I never in my wildest dreams would have thought. And I think also the cool thing about it too that I definitely don't take for granted is that it's reaching so many people that do not know about the ocean. Like it's so easy to forget. I grew up in Southern California. I've always loved the ocean. I'm in a scientific family, but most of our world, most of the United States does not live. I mean,
Mhm.
well, there's statistics about most of the world. It's like 30% of the world population lives on a coastline, but but most of us
Not
do
all
not
of
have
them know the ocean though.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. Like the educational
yeah.
background, and I think a lot of scientists assume prior knowledge or like they've been in their bubble for so long, even when it comes to like climate change communication, like obviously it affects everybody, but let's not forget a lot of people, first of all, haven't been in school for a long time.
Yeah.
So you're trying to tell them about Earth's like retaining its long wave radiation. Stop right there.
Yeah.
You lost 95% of the population when you said that. So when I see like these views on my videos, I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And my goal too is not just to like have people watch, like obviously it's great to have people watch and people like ocean people will continue to drink the Kool-Aid. But what really gets me is when people are like, not ocean people. They grew up, they're like in Indiana or they're some landlocked country and they're like, this is so interesting, or I never knew this
Mhm.
about the ocean. That
Yeah.
to me is like, that's really cool because I could,
Yeah.
yeah, I could, the people that drink the Kool Aid, and that's great. But that's the crazy thing about TikTok. That's like, I could reach a random person in a random country that just learned something about the ocean, and maybe that sparked a little something in them to just be more vigilant of their climate, their environment, the ocean around them. Like that is just, that's the coolest for me.
And it is. It's really interesting, and especially like it's an opportunity for education. But again, you do it in a very entertaining way. You know, I feel good after I listen to these episodes. You know, like that's and I know like you're like, oh, that's what I want people to do. But you know, when you talk about oceans, a lot of the times there's a lot of doom and gloom when we talk about oceans, right? Like, you know, even you see these big documentaries that have been, you know, Emmy award winning documentaries. There's a lot of doom and gloom. I mean, I think David Attenborough had the world crying when he put out Blue Planet 2, and that poor sperm whale calf was died of plastic pollution, like right in front of everybody. And we were all like, what the hell, David? Like, what are you doing to us? You know? And but like when you are able to connect things that are interesting to people, like we were talking about this before we press record. I was just watching your video on the Resolute desk, you know, in the White House. Never would have thought that had an ocean connection to it, right? And it's not directly with the ocean, but it's an important part of history, not only American history, but Canadian history of people trying to find that Northwest Passage. And you get your map fix in there, and you talk about the different map, and you have those. I think it's really good. I think what you're able to do, and this is what Randy Olson has been talking about for years. He's a big science communication guy, like in marine science, and it's all about getting people's emotions involved. You know, getting not just necessarily the bad emotions, like the sad emotions, but getting the curiosity emotion. You know, you got some good humor in there too. You got some funny bits that you do as well. But it's really great that you're able to communicate that, and it's not just straight up facts. It's here's facts in an interesting way. Did you ever think about this, or did you know about this? And I've seen some creators do that too. There's another creator who does a lot about like the world wars and like historical wars, and he has this way of like really getting into it, and he always starts, did you know about this, and did you know about it? And it's just like, and people are like, oh, this is really, really interesting. It's cool to do that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of work involved in putting these videos together. You can't do this in like 5 minutes. Give me an average. I know it probably varies, but give me an average of how long do you spend with these videos? Is this a scripted video?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So I'll take you through the whole process, because now I have like a whole way of doing it. I will either think of a question, or someone will ask me a question. For example, like the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. Someone will be like, what the heck is that? So I'll think of a question, or someone will ask a question in the comments. I had a really popular one about like what is the bottom of the seafloor? Like, how deep is the sand? And I was like, oh, actually, it's not sand. It's dead organic matter. So I'll think of a question, and then I'll put together like the key. I'll break it down in terms of like what science, what physics and chemistry does a person need to know to appreciate how complex this is. Maybe they need to know about how organic matter decomposes. Maybe they need to know about how there's no light in the ocean. So I think about like, what are all the key facts that go into truly understanding this? I have to find some decent figures. That doesn't take too long. But I'll make one sheet that has all the pictures that I would like to show, and I'll just screenshot all the pictures, and then I think about, how am I going to say this? But what takes a long time is thinking of the hook, for sure. And then filming it never takes more than 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I will say, like, I have a huge depth of prior knowledge, so there's very little that I really need to research when it comes to true science questions. I do love maritime history and naval history, and I think it's ocean exploration. I think that's a really important and cool way to bring people into oceanography, is to like help us all appreciate how little we know about the ocean and how long we have tried to learn about it. So those take a little bit more time, but I live and breathe, like, I just finished a book about cod. I'm now reading a book about how the U.S. government in the Cold War invested billions into oceanography. I'm always reading things about the oceans to like build up the knowledge base and to find like, oh, I should tell people about this.
Yeah.
So from start to finish, I'll have a couple ideas brewing for a couple weeks at a time. But truthfully, the best ideas and the best videos do come to me in a flash,
Right.
where I'm like, oh, I need to tell the story right now. For example, I've always been fascinated with how Robert Ballard found the Titanic. Such a cool story. Most people don't know that he was like actually looking for remnants of nuclear submarines that had been lost in Cold War. I think that's such a cool story. It's always been in my head, but then like I didn't know how do I bring people into that. And it was the day before Thanksgiving, and I was with my boyfriend's family, and they're asking me all these like great questions about oceanography and stuff. And then it just came to me. I was like, oh, I should just like do this dumb hook where I say that you should talk about this at Thanksgiving. Like I was like, this is what you're going to talk about this Thanksgiving. And that video got like 3 million views because people were like, what?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, the Titanic sank, right? And so like, yeah, but cover to cover, it'll take anywhere between like, if it's a brilliant flash, it'll take an hour. If I'm marinating on it longer, it'll take a couple weeks.
Yeah. I can just imagine that Thanksgiving one. Just be like, the Titanic sank. Did you guys know this? Like, and then I'll go through the story. I feel like that's one of the things that you're just like, that comes out of nowhere. Like, why would people want it? Oh, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stay and listen to this.
Because if I started my videos being like, let me tell you the history of the discovery of the Titanic, like, I'm going to keep the history nerds, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, like, how am I going to swing this around? And do so in an exciting way, too. Getting back to your point about, like, my attitude in my videos, I think I find the gloom and doom, although, like, definitely warranted sometimes, right?
Yes.
Like, it is heavy stuff, and it's, like, concerning things. I think about this a lot, which is that it's not fear, to a certain degree, is not a good motivational tool.
No. Agreed.
And so when I was at the second year of my PhD or the first year of my PhD, I took a class that was really interesting. It was a graduate level class on how true leaders in the environmental or sustainability movements have, like, how do they do a good job? Because from a marketing standpoint, climate change got off on a bad foot. It didn't.
Yeah,
and the analogy was compared to like the space race. Let's think about the space race for a second. That motivated all of America. Like the public approval of spending billions of dollars to send a man to space, which like I'm a huge
was unheard
fan.
of, and it was unheard of at that point. Like it was like, can we really do this? Yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to be first.
And everyone was motivated. And everyone's like, yeah, this is a crazy scientific challenge to just. And public approval widespread. Now, I think about that all the time. Like, getting people excited is not for nothing. And even, I could paint all of my stuff in a way scarier light. And even still, sometimes people are like, why are you smiling when you, like, say all this heavy stuff? But I do think it's like, well, I don't think freaking people out is the answer. I think getting people to appreciate, like, whoa, this is a huge challenge. And like, no, this is a big problem. But also, here why the complexity of this are so interesting. And maybe that inspires you to just learn more. I think learning is like the start of actually making change happen. But yeah, I mean, you can't market everything in a positive light.
No,
I'm not saying like climate change is a positive thing. It's not fun like the space race. But I do go back to that all the time when I'm making my content. I'm like, how do I talk about something that's like a little bit the Atlantic Mariana will overturn circulation? That's scary.
Yeah.
That'd be really freaky if that shut down. But instead of like saying that, I'm going to say this is a really interesting, complex phenomenon that goes on in our climate, and you should know what it does.
Yeah.
Instead of, if you want to get
fearful that somebody's saying it's going to stop and the world is going to end.
Yes. Because I feel like that kind of communication has only gotten more polarized, as with
Mm-hmm.
everything, right? Where it's like, I can't believe you don't care about this. This is so bad. And then the other side being like, this isn't our fault. Why are you saying the world isn't ending? Da da da. And I'm like, how about we lower the volume
Yeah.
and instead be like, talk about why this is interesting. People can draw their own conclusions and
Yeah.
like take that where they want to take it.
For sure. And especially if you're just educating, here's the process. Here's how it
Yeah.
works. And
Yeah.
here's what people are saying it's slowing down and what that means. And then you can
Yeah.
just explain it a little bit more instead of, I mean, that headline was fearful. I remember that headline coming. It wasn't only on CNN. It was all over the
Yeah.
place.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And that headline seems to come up every once in a while. Like it's like a
Yeah.
reoccurring story that they
Every
like to
time a
hit you
new
with.
study comes out, they're
Yeah.
like, let's swipe this up, let's scare the
Yeah.
crap out of everybody. Like,
Yeah.
which again, it's like, and part of it too is like, I don't believe scientists can be frustrated at people for not having the correct amount of empathy for a problem if they didn't educate people in the first place.
Right.
Like, you can't,
100%.
you need to meet people in the middle.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to, then I don't think you have a right to be so frustrated because not everyone got a PhD in climate science,
Yeah.
So you need to like meet somewhere in the middle. And I think the education is the first step. So I so enjoy being here at this point where I can like help with that.
Well, I'll tell you, we love it. I'm gonna say that from your audience as a representative from your audience, not that I represent your audience, loves it. And then you can tell just by the views and the consistent views that you're getting and the increased views that you're getting on a regular basis. It's just absolutely wonderful to watch you work, to be able to talk about science in the way that you do. It's so much fun. Like I said, I'm a huge fan, and like just hearing your PhD and hearing the enthusiasm that you have for science in general, and science for eutrophication and sort of coastal eutrophication. I'm looking forward to seeing what you're able to do and what you're going to be able to do with the next job that you have. So, you just finished your PhD like 3 months ago. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to ask the fun questions, like, now that you've grown up, what do you want to be?
I know, that's such a crazy question, Andrew. Yes, I think about this every day. I know for a fact that I think my skills, most people that know me personally, they're like, so you're going to be a professor, right? Like, oh, so you're going to teach for the rest of your life, which, I mean, in a perfect world, if I could just make interesting TikToks, like, I'd be so happy doing that. But as of right now, it doesn't really pay the bills. And
Yeah.
I do want to put my efforts to work on a specific project. So, for example, I have been really interested in offshore wind. Really interested in offshore wind. I think that is the direction. Energy is critical to everybody.
sure.
We will run out of fossil fuel. How do we find a good way to use the ocean as an energy resource without like causing any detrimental impacts? I am so fascinated with that. So, for example, like an ideal job I applied for a couple months ago was offshore wind environmental expert. Like, I would love to help, site offshore wind farms. I'd love to help be there for the full process and understand the oceanography, understand the atmospheric, relationship.
Even the just spatial analysis of how to locate them. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. How far can you be from shore? Will the other turbines interact with each other? Do they interact with any sort of marine life or birds or
other
anything?
ocean users? Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. I don't want to interact with fishing. So those questions fascinate me. I'd love to do something like that.
Yeah.
That's where my aim is right now. So currently I'm living in Boulder, Colorado. I moved out to Boulder. I love Colorado.
Beautiful place.
I loved Southern California, but I've spent pretty much my entire life there. I like grew up there. I went to UCSB, I went to UCLA, I've lived in San Diego. And I just wanted to see something new.
Yeah.
Boulder, Colorado has the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy. That's their like primary renewable energy research facility. So that is out here. That's honestly like my top choice. I would love to work there. There's a big NOAA office here, the Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I'm already in the process for interviewing for a job there. There's the
Cross your
National Center for
fingers.
Atmospheric Research. Yeah, crossing my fingers. So it's kind of surprising. A lot of people are like, "Why are you in Colorado? You're an
Yeah.
oceanographer." But there's actually a shocking amount of like atmospheric and oceanic science that goes on out here.
Yeah. And
Um,
I was just gonna say there's like a big like ocean proponent there. Like just in terms of the
mhm.
people. I mean it's very similar to California I find where there's a lot of people who are nature focused, you know, Rockies,
Yep.
hiking, that kind of stuff. But also
Hmm.
there are a lot of ocean advocates
Absolutely.
in Colorado. So you're
Yeah.
not alone like in terms of that.
Yeah.
Your level of oceanography knowledge might be you might be like almost at the top in terms of like a
Yeah, I might
like
be a big fish.
unique. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
And I'll be the town's coastal oceanographer, but
yeah, hey, you
I
never
don't
know.
mind.
Yeah.
I don't mind. Yeah, in my perfect world, I'd also do a lot of science communication, and it's been really fun, at least these last like 2 months, to like give
Yeah.
it all the time I can. But at the same time, I think it'll naturally grow over time. I'm at this interesting point though, where I'm like, well, do I grow it more? And like, how much do I grow it? And I know there's an audience for it. Another like pipe dream or like offshoot life, I would love to like have an ocean show someday on TV or
Mm.
be like a talking head for Discovery or, I'd love to continue to like educate people about the ocean on a broader
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
And I do like similar to my PhD. I'm like, I know that'll come.
Yeah.
I know I can make
Manifest
it
it.
there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'm
Yes.
manifesting it. But in the meantime, I don't think I have the chops to do only science communication, to be self-employed. I A PhD is like being self-employed, and I'm
True.
frankly a little bit tired of it.
Yeah, hey, I get it. It's a long process. It could be a
Yes.
traumatic process when
Yes.
looking at all the stuff that you have to do. A lot of people say it's basically working two jobs in one, maybe even plus that, like even more.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
a lot to handle for anybody, and you did that. Plus, you developed a science communication channel that is blowing up, and it continues to blow up, and I'm looking forward to
So
seeing what you're
fun.
up to next. Like it's going to
Oh,
be
thank
fingers
you.
crossed for all the opportunities that you're involved with now, and hopefully that
Yes.
continues, and hopefully
Yes.
your enthusiasm for the science communication continues as well because it's been a pleasure to
Mm,
watch those videos. I enjoy it,
thank you.
and I'm sure
Thank
the
you.
7 million people that watch your videos also enjoy it.
Thank
um,
you. Yes, I don't, if, of anything, that is the last to fade for sure.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, I think so. I think that's what it sounds like. But it's honestly, Paige, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast and to get to know
Thank
you more.
you.
And look forward to having you back on when you get when once you
Absolutely.
get that job or once you develop the science more and the science communication
Yeah.
more.
Yes.
Why don't you let people know how they can get a hold of you? There's the TikTok, right? Which can you just
Yes.
like let them know the
Yes.
handle and how they can look you up?
Yeah, the handle for TikTok is Lil Lil Ocean Page, or you could look up PhD Pagey. And I also have an Instagram that is the same handle,
Okay,
Lil Ocean Page. And I'm starting to put my videos on YouTube Shorts, so you can find me
love
there.
it.
And who knows, maybe I'll get bored and like actually start making long form YouTube videos someday.
Hey,
I'm not sure
you never
if I'll ever
know.
do that, but
Maybe a
part of me
podcast in
wants
the
to, so
future.
who
Who
knows
knows?
what the
Yeah.
future holds.
Love it. Love it. I can see like story time with Paige, ocean story time with
Oh,
Paige.
I
I
would
like,
love to do that. I know, that's my dream. That's my dream.
well, Paige, it's been a pleasure. We're looking forward to seeing what you're up to next. And thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Paige, for joining us today on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast to talk about not only your PhD work, but your science communication work. I think it's really important for scientists to have both sort of that skill set, using the skills that they have, using their personality to bring out the messaging that they want to bring out. And that's something that Paige does. So again, her handle is at Lil Ocean Page. So Lil Ocean Page, Paige, obviously all one word. You can go on TikTok. You can also go on Instagram to follow her. I highly suggest that you do. She's going to be up to some pretty incredible things through her career. It's just she's just scratching the surface, literally just dipping a toe in, and I can't wait till she dives in and we get to hear all about it. So if you have any questions or comments about this episode, please feel free to leave a comment on, if you're watching this on Spotify on the video, or if you're just listening to it, you can leave comments. You can also leave a comment on the YouTube video, and you can get a hold of me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. Just DM me. I'd love to hear your feedback on this episode and any other episode of the podcast. Feel free to reach out. We talked about it in the podcast how some people just don't feel like they feel weird about reaching out. Paige reached out to me. She got on the podcast, and that's something that I didn't do, and reach out to her first. And I kick myself for doing that, because I should be reaching out to more people to have them on the podcast. But I appreciate Paige reaching out, and I would love to hear from you, whether you want to be on the podcast or not, because you got something interesting that you think is interesting, or you just want to give feedback or talk about the ocean. This is where we start that conversation, and we did a great job doing it today. I want to hear from you what you think about the ocean and what you would like to hear more about, or what you would like to talk about. Hit me up at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time. Of course, my name is Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.